Hi, it's a real honour to be here today. I was a student here at Royal Holloway and absolutely love driving onto the campus. So I hope those of you who are visiting here today have really experienced the excitement of being at Royal Holloway as well. My name's Helene, and I wanted to talk to you a little bit about my condition and how it affected me and my challenges that I faced. When I was small, I wasn't interested in sport whatsoever. I had the same dream as a lot of other young girls. I wanted to dance and be a ballet dancer. In my very early years, I kept falling over a lot. I would end up with problems with joints slipping out of place. I struggled with writing because my fingers were so flexible that I struggled with holding my pencil on my pen, and I was like the last in my class to be allowed to use a pen. Still bugs me now. And I think simple things when my family used to say, "You're so clumsy, you'll fall over all the time." And it wasn't until I was 13 and I was actually at full-time dance school and I kept getting a lot of injuries in my joints that I finally was diagnosed with the condition Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. Ehlers-Danlos syndrome is a defect in the synthesis of collagen, which is a protein and a building block in your body, giving you strength and support. And how that affects me is a lot in flexibility. Let's skip X-ray of my neck. It causes problems with blood vessels, so I bruise easily, and it affects the internal organs as well. So it means some of your internal organs, such as your lungs, are quite fragile. So it does affect people in various different ways, and there's a whole different set of different sort of subgroups of Ehlers-Danlos syndrome as well. But going back to me as a young dancer, as soon as I was diagnosed, I was at full-time ballet school at the time, and I was moved into the bottom set of dance and kind of written off that at the end of the year I'd probably have to leave. I was desperate to continue in my dream for dance, and I carried on and managed to work my way back up to the top. But in the end, my injury, when I was 17, I was up at the Royal Ballet School in London, and injury to my ankle did mean that I couldn't continue with my dance. I was a student here at Royal Holloway, which is where I found my love of sport. And I got into rowing, and in 2006, I won my first World Championships. I want to talk to you a little bit about how, as an elite athlete in a rare condition, and how it's actually possible to balance it. This is Caversham Lakes. It's the home of GB rowing. The Olympic and Paralympic teams train here full-time, 2-3 training sessions a day, 6 days a week. If there's anyone here who has a rare condition that maybe affects their health, you can probably understand that's quite a lot of impact on your body. It's all very scientific sort of setting. I spend a lot of time in here over at Marlow at the British Olympic Medical Institute, patching me up, putting me back together, and really helping me learn how to work with my body to be able to do the things that I wanted to do. It's a very scientific background. I'm having lactate testing there. I've been on a rowing machine. I've rowed for 6 kilometres. They prick my ear, take my blood, measure the lactate in it, which is a waste product, tell me whether I'm working hard enough, and then make me do it all over again. That was a regular kind of thing that shows you the sort of scientific way that the athletes are programmed to train. We also have this environmental chamber where they can put the temperatures up to anything that they would like to, increase the humidity. So it's a bit kind of like training abroad, which helps you if you've got to go abroad and compete as well. So coming back to my kind of story, I race in a single scull, so that's a rowing boat on my own. And when everyone sees me racing, it's just me in a boat on my own. And I get that moment of glory when it goes right on the medal podium. But there's a huge team of people behind every athlete, but especially me when I had my condition. So up there are the 2 coaches and my physio in the middle, who generally put me back together when the coaches broke me. And I had a team manager, a weights coach, and weights were a real problem for me because my joints were so hypermobile. Lifting weights had to be done in very specific ways and in very supported ways. We have a team doctor, and she spent an awful lot of time trying to make sure that we got my training properly correct. We also had a nutritionalist, which can help with certain aspects of my rare condition, and also a sports psychologist who would help you work with those race day nerves and how you cope with competing against someone you're training against every single day for that one spot in the boat to go off to an Olympics or Paralympic Games. So some of the things I had to do a little bit differently. This is the physio there. My shoulders are very flexible, so rowing puts an awful lot of strain through your shoulders and upper body. So I had to really work on my shoulder stability. I spent a lot of time doing Pilates and very tiny exercises that you might think that looks so insignificant. But actually for me, it was giving me the very, very specific joint control that, say, maybe someone I was competing against, they wouldn't need to worry because they had enough collagen to hold them all together. They didn't have the same sort of issues that I did. This was me being put in a body cast. I wasn't too keen on this idea. But the idea was then is when I was lifting weights, it would protect my spine. So it meant that I was using another means of supporting my body to be able to do the same training that my colleagues were doing. And also here, trying to reduce the swelling in my joints. If my joints came out of place, I would have to really be very hot on self-management so that as soon as I had a problem with the joint, I treated it instantly. That's an ice bath. The reason I'm using a plant pot is because we're on training camp in Spain and it was the only thing that I had. Drugs are also an issue. We've talked a lot here about the drugs that can be used to treat conditions. There isn't a drug that can treat my condition, but there are drugs you can use to treat the symptoms. And in terms of drugs testing, having a medical condition just still meant I had to comply by all of the usual drug rules and be available for drugs testing 1 hour of the day, every single day of the year. So I had to make sure that any drugs that I were using meant that I wouldn't be affected by drugs testing. But also the big element of that I faced as a rower was a misunderstanding of what my condition was. Most people who I'd be competing against would have spinal injuries, so they would have a loss of function in a similar area to me, but they weren't necessarily as flexible as I was. So looking at this picture here, I'm very, very mobile in my spine. So I'm normally strapped in around your stomach. So most people can't bend that far. But you can see the extent that I'm bending over. And a lot of people didn't understand that I can't control that bend. It just happens when I lean forward. And people don't understand how that can affect the rowing stroke. It was a bit of an advantage to me because it meant I actually got a little bit of a longer stroke, but it meant I was very, very prone to injury. And for me, in rowing, and if there's any rowers there, it's all about doing hours and hours of training. And sometimes it was very hard to think, actually, I've got to do what's right for me. And today, even though the girl I'm trialling against, trying to get into that boat, she's out training, the right thing for me is actually have a rest day and to be very careful about what I'm doing. So in terms of going back to the training, I did have to train a little bit differently. That was me out of my boat in the summer just before we went out to Beijing. This is the Olympic Village in Beijing. It was absolutely huge, and it was a village, not just a small complex. The dining hall could seat 10,000 people at any one time, and you could have any type of food you possibly wanted, 24 hours a day, and it was all free. Lots and lots of distractions there when you're an athlete. So we had to keep ourselves very focused on what we were there to do, which wasn't to get excited. We were there to do a job. The rowing course out of Shunyi was absolutely fantastic. It was probably one of the best rowing courses I've raced at. I have raced at Dorney Lake, where the London 2012 venues are going to be, and I'm sure that the venue for 2012 will definitely compete with Shunyi. In the heats, I had to race in heats to qualify for the final. We all had to qualify just to get to the heats in the first place outside of the Paralympics. In the heats, it was pretty much like a day in England. And if there's any rowers here, you might think, why am I wearing those things over my hands? They're called pogies, and you generally wear them when it's freezing cold to keep your hands warm. Now, clearly, in Beijing, where it's incredibly hot and humid, why in the world would you wear those? My condition affects my hands a little bit. So if it was pouring with rain, which it was on this day, the handles become very, very slippy. So for me, the best way to do that was to put on these pogies and protect the handles of the blades from the rain. Everyone else thought I was daft, but sometimes you just have to do things a little bit differently. In the heats, I qualified fastest through in the heats, which meant I had a rest day in between heats and finals. That was definitely what I need, because fatigue is the one thing I really struggled with. On the day that I woke up for my final, I was absolutely terrified. So I'd changed so many things in my life in that year to be able to go out and chase this dream of winning a gold medal in Beijing. And as we left from the Olympic Village, it was an hour's drive up to the lake. You're on the bus with your competition sat all around you, which is quite a strange environment. But you're going through the Olympic lanes, so there was no struggle with transport whatsoever. The day in finals was completely different to the heats day. It was incredibly, incredibly hot. There was not a cloud in the sky. It was really, really, really warm, and that was quite a test. It's a test for anybody, but it also meant it added to my challenges on race day. One of the things that my support team had to do is make sure that I was not there for very much time before I raced. I had a very set program that I went through with my physio to make sure that I was in the best physical shape before I went out to perform. And on race day, I only arrived at the course 40 minutes before I got in the boat, which was this point here. And I paddled off into the warm-up lake, ready to go and get ready. As I came up into the warm-up lake, it was a really, really windy day, and I realised my boat was making a very strange noise. And I realised there was a pin sticking up on my rigger where it shouldn't have been. I thought, it's fine, I'll get to the start line, my coach will be there, he'll fix it, it'll be fine. So I got up to the start line and realised my coach wasn't there up on the side of the bank. I had a small panic. And I moved in front of the start system and said, I've got an equipment failure. They came down and this lovely Canadian lady said, oh, it's fine, I'll just make sure it's tighten it up for you. And she did, and she snapped it. So I then sat on the start line, the biggest race of my life, with a pin that had snapped in my rigger, thinking, oh, this is definitely not what I need. My nerves were an absolute wreck at this point. And my coach then arrived on the side of the bank. They speedboated him over, and he fixed it for me. I thought, right, that's it. So I sat there on the start line, the 5-minute call. I absolutely hated the 5-minute call for the start of racing. All my nerves would start coming back into play. I'd start questioning myself. Have I done everything? Oh, the girl in the lane next to me's got longer arms than me. I'd panic about everything. But on this particular day, something changed in my mind. And I thought, do you know what? We've done everything we possibly can do. I had all sorts thrown at me in the year in the run into Beijing. Some of it was due to medical conditions, but some of it was just things that happen in your life as an athlete. And I really tried to move everything I could do to put myself in the best possible place. So about the 2-minute call, I thought, do you know what? This is just like any other time trial. Just pretend I'm on the water in Caversham in Reading. I'm just going out to do my best performance. Ignore the fact that I'm racing against an international field, a few more people watching, few TV cameras, just ignore that, just go out and do my race. And as I went out from the start line, I managed to get ahead pretty quickly on in the race. And as coming into the closing stages of the race, I started to feel absolutely exhausted. And I was obviously pretty sore. When you're racing at a flat-out intensity, you do tend to get quite uncomfortable, your lungs are burning, and physically just the strain on your joints, and especially my joints that are very flexible, was quite intense. But as I crossed that finish line, I couldn't really see straight. I could just see bright lights because I was so exhausted. I was just so thankful that the race had come to a close. After we came back from Beijing, by the time we were in Beijing, we were in such a bubble that we didn't really see the media hype and the media following that was going on. And when I returned, I was quite shocked to see that a national newspaper had put a cartoon of that in there. And I'm not sure whether it's a good or a bad thing when they start drawing cartoons of you. In terms of now, obviously, athletes who have competed in Beijing would really be looking towards London 2012. And it's really exciting that one of the villages will be here at Royal Holloway for the flatwater canoeing and rowing. I won't be competing in 2012. I sustained an injury to my back, again down to my hypermobility in my spine. And last year had to have quite a few metal bits put in my spine to hold it together. That probably for me was one of the real struggles, because I've always managed to just get on with my rare condition, and it hasn't really affected me doing stuff. I've just had to do it in a slightly different way. But this for me really did make a big difference, because I went from being really, really, really bendy to suddenly very, very stiff, and I really struggled post-operatively to recover from that. And I think really for me, one of the things that I would say is if you're thinking of going into research, or if you have a rare condition, it's really important to think it doesn't, yes, I do have a condition, but it doesn't define me. I still can do things that I want to do have to do them slightly differently. And also the people not understanding it is probably the biggest issue. I think when people understand what the condition is, they understand how you can probably think a bit more laterally to actually still go on and achieve. Things are still possible to go out and do. I was predisposed to injury as an athlete, very predisposed. Now, just in my everyday life, I would be predisposed picking something up incorrectly. I could end up with a problem in a joint. But we didn't let that limit it. We just had to think, as I say, think a bit more laterally about how we went on to do things. I wanted to leave with you my final, it was kind of like my mantra that I had in the run into Beijing. Every day when I got up in the morning, I used to say to myself, how am I going to live today in order to create the tomorrow I'm committed to? And for me, in the run into Beijing, that was, what am I going to do today in training? What am I going to do today in physio? What am I going to do today in Pilates that's going to make my boat go as quick as it can do in September on that lake in Xunyi? And that was my real focus. And I hope maybe some of you today can take that away and think, okay, what are we going to do back in our laboratories? Or what am I going to do with my career that will go and help with sort of finding cures, finding drugs to alleviate symptoms of rare conditions? And it really will make a difference for all of those people out there who are struggling with conditions that maybe don't get so much profile as some of the others. Thank you.